Hello, and welcome to What in the Mystical Hell podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 5, Exploring the Paranormal. I'm your host, Nikki. This episode took me so much longer to finish than usual. Part of that is I've had some life stuff going on, so I had to step back from the podcast for a bit. The other part is that I've been exposed to some different perspectives about the paranormal and spirits, and I've been reevaluating my framework about how I approach investigations. But I'll dive deeper into this a little later in the podcast. If you've listened to my podcast before, you'll know that most of my episodes have been about my journey as a practicing witch. Today we're doing something a little different. Witchcraft isn't my only interest, and this podcast will hopefully be a reflection of that. Paranormal phenomena is also one of my passions, and that's what we'll be talking about today. My belief in the paranormal began when I was very young. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot, and some of the locations that we lived in had interesting energy. I spoke to and occasionally saw people that no one else could see or hear. My mother would refer to them as Nikki's imaginary friends if I ever mentioned them to her, or if I ever talked about it in front of people. But, usually she was preoccupied with adulting and keeping a roof over our heads, so I don't remember talking to her about them much. But I do recall talking to them about her and my stepdad. I don't remember anything like them giving me facts about their lives or even their deaths for that matter. I just remember them like friends that I hung out with when I wasn't playing with the neighborhood kids. At the time, I didn't know the phenomena for what it was. As I grew older, I would hear voices, ones that would tell me something was a bad idea, or not to turn this way or that, or don't go down that alley. Sometimes I listened, sometimes I didn't. I found out soon enough that the voices were usually right. Fun fact, I still don't always listen, and then I usually get a big "I told you so" afterwards. It's only been in the past 6 or so years that I've even acknowledged that the voices were separate from myself, separate beings entirely. I always just thought that it was the little voice in my head, like my conscience, telling me good from bad, or it was my intuition, or it was my gut. I always go with my gut. That's my favorite saying. Always go with my gut. Once I started to go through more of an awakening, as it were, I started to realize that what I was experiencing was clairaudience. Clairs were not a term that I grew up with, so I was in completely unfamiliar territory. But looking back, I realized that the knowing that my grandmother always seemed to have could have been clairvoyance, or even clairaudience with the right connections. I used to joke around and say, Grandma has a direct line to God, and she always seemed to know things that other people wouldn't. Or one time she'd said to me that she was going to go pray for me because I'd been out of work for a while, and she came back and said, "Oh, I talked to God, and you're going to get a job the first week of January." And sure enough, I did. So, could have been clairvoyance, or maybe she did have a direct line to someone. Occasionally I'd see things, people that weren't actually there, shadows out of the corner of my eye, the figures that you seem to track, and if you look, they disappear, but if you kind of aren't trying to look at them straight on, they seem to move. One Halloween season, when the veil was thinning, I asked to be able to see more than the normal senses would give me. Well, be careful what you wish for. That night, coming home from work, I almost ran off the road, trying to avoid the person standing in the middle of my lane. When I stopped and went back to check on them, there was no one there. I had a few more instances like that, and then I very, very politely asked to not be able to see those things again until I was ready. Every once in a while I see things, usually just out of the corner of my eye. And then during the spring or fall when the veils are thinning, I may see full figures, but they're never as solid as they had been before, or during that time. Someday I might be ready, but I'm okay to wait as long as it takes until then. In my current home, we do have some activity, but it mostly centers around my youngest daughter. The being inhabiting this house with us will tap on walls and windows in her room, open up her closet door just slightly, and make sure it's just enough that she'll notice, or it will pop open her bedroom door without turning the handle. She and our friend Christine have also seen what looks like a blonde woman walking past the back windows and doors on the deck. Now, she moves very quickly. I suspect that particular apparition is the former owner of the house. Maybe she's checking on us to see if we're taking care of her home. The entity upstairs and Liz's door opener, it doesn't seem malicious at all, and Liz will definitely let them know what she's okay with and what behavior she's not okay with. And when she tells me these things, I listen with an open mind, and we see if there's any other explanations for the things that she's going through. Now, just to note here, whenever anyone comes to me with reports of activities, I do a few things. First and foremost, I listen to them. I listen to everything that they have to tell me, because there's nothing more frustrating to me than someone saying, "Oh, you're just imagining things. There's a logical explanation." Yes, there is usually a logical explanation. But sometimes that logical explanation is that you're sharing your space with a non-corporeal entity. That being said, I do recommend a little investigating to make sure there's not a mundane reason for the activity you're experiencing. For example, we had a friend whose son was hearing scratching in his bedroom and the walls in the middle of the night, about the same time every night. Pardon me. She asked what I thought she should do. I recommended that she first have a pest control person come out and check out the house to make sure that she didn't have any furry new roommates living in the walls. They'd been doing an add-on to their house, and it was likely squirrels or some type of nocturnal animal had found a new home in the walls. That would explain the scratching sound in the middle of the night. I also told her, though, if they didn't find anything, that I would absolutely come out and look for anything paranormal. But always check for the easy explanation. If you try and debunk things and still can't explain them, then you likely have something paranormal or mystical going on. I don't often get the chance to travel around and investigate, but in October 2022, we took a road trip with some stops in spooky places. And earlier this year, I took a trip and ended up staying in a haunted hotel. I'll share the most recent story first. In the beginning of February of this year, I took a weekend trip to Cheyenne, Wyoming with a partner of mine. We stayed at the Plains Hotel. Now, we've stayed here previously, but this time around, I heard that it was haunted. Now, I don't actually remember any weird things happening the last time we were here, but I have in the past stayed at very, very haunted hotels without incident. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, incidents would be fun, but getting a good night's sleep is pretty awesome too. Now, both stays we were in the room very little, mostly just to change your sleep. I was talking with our friend Becky on the Saturday evening, and the conversation turned to the mystical and paranormal. Becky has her own gifts, one of them being the ability to communicate with spirits. As we were talking, she mentioned that the Plains was haunted and that the room that she and some of our friends were staying in had reports of activity. Of course, I was extremely excited, and I told her that if anything happened, she absolutely had to call us. She had to call us because I totally wanted to witness something. And we didn't get a call that night, but the next morning, Becky shared her experience with me. Before I get into her experience, though, here's a little history on the hotel. The historic Plains Hotel was opened in March 1911 and was considered Cheyenne's premier hotel. Besides a stained glass skylight and a 2-story mezzanine, the Plains had 5 stories, 3 elevators, 100 guest rooms, private baths, telephones, and other amenities that made it stand out among the hotels of its time. Today, a stay at the Plains also comes with the opportunity to see any of the 4 ghosts that are reported to be haunting the hotel. 3 of these ghosts are tied together and are seen in various parts of the hotels. One of those 3 was a woman named Rosie. Here's Rosie's story. Rosie was a young bride celebrating her honeymoon at the Plains. At some point during the honeymoon night, her husband left their room and went to the hotel bar. There is speculation that Rosie's nervousness about the marriage bed frustrated her husband, and that's why he left. He was gone for quite a while, so she wandered out to the second floor mezzanine to look for him. As she looked down on the lobby, she indeed found her husband, talking to another woman. She watched as the two made their way up the stairs to a room on the 4th floor. In a jealous rage, Rosie shot and killed them both, then returned to her room and shot herself. The activity centers itself in room 226, where Rosie took her own life, and room 444, which was the other woman's room. Room 444 is also the room where Becky and our friends were staying. There's also reported activity in the mezzanine. Now, back to Becky's story. There are vintage and antique items displayed around the hotel. One of the items displayed is Rosie's wedding dress. However, it is not displayed in the lobby. It is also not displayed in room 226, the honeymoon suite where Rosie took her own life. It's displayed in room 444, where Rosie reportedly shot her husband and the other woman. That act in itself could be fueling the activity, because I know I'd be pissed if my wedding dress was in the room where my husband broke our vows, or where my husband planned to break our vows. Insult to injury, one of our friends may have drunkenly played with the dress. Now, please note, the dress was not damaged in any way, but still not a great idea. If nothing else, it's rude to play with other people's things. So, after our evening out, Becky returned to room 444 and decided to take a shower before bed. Now, she had to let the water run a little bit. It had come out a brownish color, not necessarily uncommon in older historic hotels, but after a few minutes it was clear. She took her shower without incident, but when she was coming out of the shower, she saw 2 bloody handprints on the wall. I'm not sure if she went for her phone or just looked away for a second, but the handprints disappeared. The next morning, she asked her friends if they had seen anything like that, and both said no. Now, when I was researching the activity around the hotel, bloody handprints were not reported among the activity I found. So Becky wasn't imagining anything that she'd read or heard about. Now, could she have matrixed the image of bloody handprints? There's always the possibility. But this person doesn't really seem prone to that sort of thing. If anything, she's more likely to try and debunk the image if possible. If you've never heard the term matrixing in this context, matrixing or pareidolia is when our minds take patterns and turn them into something we recognize. Like seeing Jesus in a piece of toast, right? This can be done with things that we see, hear, touch, and smell. I also had a mini experience in my room throughout the night. I kept hearing murmuring. At first, I dismissed it because the walls were thin and we did have a connected room, although the door stayed locked because we didn't know the guests on the other side. We could clearly hear the other guests through the door throughout the day and in the evening, when we'd come back to our room. But this was really late at night. Still, I thought, the walls are kind of thin. Maybe I'm hearing people on the other side. It sounded like when you're on one side of the room and people are talking quietly on the other side. You can hear that they're having a conversation, but you just can't make out the words. My dismissal backfired on me, however, when I realized that they're murmuring in the room with me, right next to my ear. Try as I might, though, I still couldn't understand what they were saying. Now, the other ghost of the Plains Hotel is a victim of what has been labeled a tragic push. There isn't a lot of information about this particular tale, except to say that there was an altercation between the victim and another guest. This ended with the victim being pushed out a 4th floor window and falling to their death. I guess it's really not necessarily a good idea to stay on the 4th floor. Could be kind of dangerous. It seems as though victims of violent deaths at the plane remain. The apparition of Rosie and her victims are still seen by guests of the hotel. There is also reports of laughter and crying coming from the newlyweds' room. Living guests may also experience feelings of dread from the murder victim in various parts of the hotel. If you've ever been to the Plains Hotel in Cheyenne, please feel free to share any experiences that you might have. I look forward to possibly going back to the Plains in the future and doing a proper investigation. Now, while you won't find me doing any investigating like you see on Ghost Adventures and the like, I do love a good road trip that has at least 1 or 2 exciting paranormal stops on the way. During our last road trip, we had more than a few interesting stops, including a ghost town, a quote-unquote haunted museum, and more than one mystical locale. In fall of 2022, I took a road trip with my oldest daughter and two of our friends. It originally started out as a 12-day road trip with different stops in California, Nevada, and Arizona. It was also originally set in August of that year. But as we took a look at time and distance, we had to make some adjustments and scale it back a bit. We ended up with an 8-day trip in October of 2022. Here's where we ended up. Bodie, California, a historic gold rush town that is also an official ghost town. Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, Vegas was just for relaxation, but we did visit the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum. Good Springs, Nevada, home of the Pioneer Saloon. The Pioneer Saloon is a historic landmark as well as the oldest bar, as it is the oldest bar in Nevada, as well as it's the place where Clark Gable waited for news of his wife, Carol Lombard, after her fatal plane crash. It's reputed to be haunted. Also visited Sedona, Arizona, where we visited some vortex sites, Joshua Tree, California, with more vortex sites, and lastly, Solvang, California. While not a mystical locale, Solvang is always worth a stop, except get there before the bakery closes, because it's a very sad thing to see all those lovely cookies through the window and you're not able to buy them, which is what happened to us. A few interesting things from our trip, not necessarily in chronological order. The Zach Bagans Haunted Museum in quotes. This museum is filled with memorabilia and reputed haunted objects. I'd heard stories of phenomena happening at the museum as well as personal experiences of some of the guests, so I was really psyched about this tour. The tour is 2 hours long, and I purchased the VIP tour for our group, which gave us a few extras. We got to crawl through this weird little tunnel. We got to go into some of the rooms first. We got to go into exhibits that not everyone was allowed into, which was kind of cool. Overall, I had mixed feelings about the museum. While I cannot discount any previous personal experiences, as I was not witness to any of those events, no one experienced anything on our tour. And I can't help but wonder if the created environment contributed to what people experienced. Here's some examples of what I consider created environment. Temperatures varied from room to room. Some rooms had mist, others didn't. Another room had a portion of the floor which vibrated, which I can only assume was from machinery below. For an easily suggestive mind, I think that these details can help have an experience. I am not an expert. I can only tell you what I personally experienced. But if you have a suggestive mind, I wonder. On the positive side, the artifacts, memorabilia, and objects were incredible. We were able to see objects that I've only ever seen in documentaries. We saw Peggy the doll, Robert the doll, and more. These are items that have documented report after report of activity. There were items from serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Charles Manson. Though he wasn't a serial killer, people killed in his name, but they had items from him. There were items owned by Anton LaVey, the leader of the Satanic Church. I mean, all of these things I found super duper fascinating. I did experience energy from some of the items we saw, and I don't believe that the energy that I felt was created or affected by the environment that I was in. So, final thoughts? I would definitely go again, though I'd want to be able to examine some of the objects, which of course they don't allow you to do, but I'd still want to. If you are planning a visit to the museum, my recommendation is go with an open mind, your wits about you, and medium expectations. After Vegas, we went to Good Springs, Nevada, and the Pioneer Saloon. The Pioneer Saloon is a historic landmark. Now, it is the oldest bar in Nevada, which makes it cool, just in that. But it's also the place where Clark Gable waited for news of his wife, Carol Lombard's fate after a plane crash. It's also reputed to be haunted. We didn't experience any paranormal activity when we were there, But we heard some really great stories from our waitress, Nancy, who was amazing. Not only did she give us a lot of the history and some personal experiences as well as guest experiences, she was just overall a fantastic server, super fun, great energy, and definitely, even if we didn't have all the other stuff that we had there, we'd go back for her. Some of the experiences that she shared with us included a guest seeing Clark Gable at the bar, sitting at the bar, bartenders hearing the sound of boots walking through the empty bar, and other patrons seeing a few of the other ghosts, a gunslinger and an old miner. I don't remember all the details, but the Pioneer Saloon is definitely on my must-visit again list. And bonus, the food's really tasty. The two mystical locales that we visited were Sedona, Arizona, and Joshua Tree, California. While in Sedona, we hiked along the Boynton Vista Trail and searched for the Boynton vortex. At this particular vortex, I actually didn't feel anything. I believe that this is because the energy there is very much indigenous energy, which isn't really in my wheelhouse. My friends Christine and Lauren both connected with the energy though, and I was able to witness some really cool phenomena with a rock. It visibly vibrated in their hands, but when I held it, nothing. Now, when I say visibly vibrated, their hands were not moving, but the rock itself was. So there was no plausible explanation. If their hand had been moving at the same time and the rock was moving, that would be one thing. But their hands were perfectly still and the rock was visibly vibrating. Mine, nothing at all. I was able to, however, have an experience with my dowsing rods, which was really cool, and it actually confirmed some questions that I had there. We're trying to plan a future trip to Sedona where we can spend more time and visit the additional vortex sites in the area. Next, we went to Joshua Tree. We had a nighttime adventure there, complete with a full moon, and I absolutely felt the vortex energy in the Joshua Tree National Park. There was like this warm buzz of energy. It was almost like my whole body was humming. We had separated slightly in order to have more personal experiences, and once I was able to relax into the energy of the park, I felt so many different sensations. It felt like I was tuning into the energy from each of the elements, first separately, and then kind of blended together. I felt really grounded and at peace. I would love to spend more time out in Joshua Tree, maybe even camping in the national park for a night or two. Now, if you know me, you know I don't camp, so for me to say that means a little bit. The last place I'm going to talk about is actually the first stop on our trip, Bodie, California. Bodie is an official ghost town, but we weren't there for an investigation. We were actually there to see some historic gold rush buildings and memorabilia. Bodie was the site for the world's first hydroelectric substation and was the first town to have an electric stamp mill, which we were able to see while we visited the town. From a distance, Bodie looks like a typical Old West town. But walking around the town, and especially in the cemetery, you feel this eerie quiet around you. There's no activity like we've been conditioned to expect from places, but there's a hushed stillness in the air. Even the other visitors seem subdued in their conversations. I did most of my exploration in the cemetery, which was rather extensive. There were all these different sections and areas that were fenced off within the sections. Children's graves could be mixed in with adult graves, and then there was a part that housed a small children's graveyard. But you could always tell the children's graves because you'd see either very small angels, like cherubs, or you'd see like bunnies or birds, usually on the tombstones of the children. Masonic symbols popped up here and there, along with other religious symbols. There was a largest building outside the cemetery, which we assumed was a crematorium, but we weren't able to go in, so we couldn't be 100% sure. After the cemetery, we kept walking through the town. Some of the buildings are really just complete disrepair, but others were in really good condition. A few were being utilized as staff housing. Now, you aren't allowed to enter most of the buildings, but you can look through the buildings to see inside. You can look through the windows to see inside. We were able to look through the windows at the hydroelectric substation, the school, and the bar, which was also the barbershop. A portion of the town had been lost to fire damage, and we didn't hike to the upper portions of the town, but Bodhi's definitely worth a visit. We had time constraints because we were trying to make our way to Vegas, so we weren't able to explore as much as we would have liked. Word to the wise, if you plan to visit Bodhi, wear good hiking shoes. And if there's any fear of heights or motion sickness issues, pay attention to your route. We went through a lot of windy mountain roads on our way to and from Bodhi. This road trip was really fun. I can't wait to be able to plan another. It's going to be a little bit off in the future, though. Okay. In the beginning of this episode, I alluded to being exposed to new insights about death and spirits. I used to not think as much about the experience of those on the other side of the veil. I admit, there may have been a time when I wondered if ghost hunting groups were addressing malevolent spirits or even demons. Even though that was a long time ago, and I'd never really believed that there was many demons out there as proclaimed, I still never really thought about how investigations might do more harm than good. I never thought about how the investigations were experienced by the Eidolon or the dead. I didn't think about how it felt on the other side of the equation. Meeting and talking with death workers recently has adjusted my perspective and helped me refine my thought process a bit more. I still want to do investigations, but instead of going in and assuming there are negative or trapped entities, I'd like to go in with more of an open mind. I want to see if whatever Eidolon is occupying the space is okay with my team being there, then seeing if they want to communicate with us. And if it is a place with malevolent entities, why are they malevolent? Are they really evil, which is way more rare than television would like you to believe? Or are they matching the energy of the investigators? I'm not going to lie. If somebody came into my space and started trying to provoke me or act the fool, I would be like, are you out of your goddamn mind? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I've heard stories of investigations where they've come in really aggressive and it did not go well. Maybe that's why. Let's be kind to one another, even if we're dead. One of the things that attracts me to paranormal investigations are the tools. There are a lot of really cool gadgets for investigating. Utilizing these instruments to measure activity for scientific research is something that I'm really interested in. I feel that mysticism and paranormal phenomena are sciences that we haven't explored enough. And because we haven't explored them, that's why people are still afraid of those things. Humans fear the unknown, and these are definitely areas where what we don't know vastly outweighs what we do. The more tools we develop to measure and study these phenomena, the better. Especially when it comes to measuring things like psychic gifts. Most psychics I know do not perform well in the lab environment. Out in the field, they get hits right and left. But in the lab, not a whole hell of a lot. Which, of course, is one of the reasons the scientific community as a whole has not held much belief towards the paranormal. But I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. Labs are pretty sterile environments. What if we made them so energetically stale that they have almost the opposite effect for psychics? Fortunately, now we have paranormal researchers and the like inventing gadgets to measure activity and improving on scientific tools in order to find hard evidence of the paranormal. One of my favorite instruments is the thermal camera. In the normal world, thermal cams are used in the building industry during energy audits and building inspections, and in the medical field to detect changes in heat energy from patients. For paranormal investigations, it's used to detect changes in temperature. Cold spots can indicate a possible spirit presence. Pardon me. I would love to use a thermal cam on my psychic friends because I'm curious as to whether or not there are fluctuations in body temperature as they're utilizing specific gifts. For example, if someone is aspected, channeling a deity or non-corporeal entity and allowing use of their body, does their body temperature change during possession? Does it look different for different deities? If a medium is speaking to the dead, does the air temperature around them change as the dead come closer? What does a thermal reading look like on a death worker, both when they are using their gifts and when they're not? Is it different for someone that lives with 1 foot in the liminal space? And what does a sin eater's thermal image look like during ritual? These are just a few of the questions I would like to have answered during an investigation. Way more than, what's your name? Why are you haunting this place? Interacting with the dead, totally cool. That would be amazing. But I'm really interested in the data. Now, there are a few locations in particular where I'd like to see what kind of results we could pull in, and I'll be airing a few future episodes about the different locales that I'd like to investigate and why. The first would be the Winchester Mystery House. I've never been there, but it's a location that, I'm really curious about. For years, it's been rumored to be the site of massive spiritual energy. If you've never heard of this location, the Winchester Mystery House is a mansion in San Jose, California, that was once the personal residence of Sarah Winchester, the widow of firearms magnate William Wirt Winchester. So if you've ever heard of the Winchester rifle, that's the empire. The house became a tourist attraction 9 months after Sarah Winchester's death in 1922. The Victorian and Gothic-style mansion is renowned for its size and its architectural curiosities, and for the number of myths and legends surrounding the structure and its former owner. That's from Wikipedia. Now, there is an official story that's told by Wikipedia and by the tourist attraction website. However, there is another site that tells a very different tale of Sarah Winchester and the Winchester House. The official story, in a nutshell, is that Sarah Winchester was haunted by the spirits of people killed by the Winchester rifles, created by her husband's company, and that she believed if she ever stopped construction on her home, the spirits of those victims would come for her. I would like to note here that several people have disputed the stories that are shared on the tour, and that there have actually been investigators that believe that the house was not haunted. But that doesn't make for really good ticket sales, does it? Or ratings if you're on a popular TV show. I started researching potential investigation locations a few years ago when I was doing a video series on the topic. During my research of the Winchester Mystery House and Sarah Winchester in particular, I came upon a website that has some very intriguing theories about Sarah and her motivations in building Winchester House the way she did. The author did not buy into the quote-unquote folklore, as they call it, but rather believes the house to be a giant puzzle designed by Sarah. They believe that Sarah's extensive education and ties to Rosicrucian and Freemason societies, plus her belief in Baconian concepts, led her to build a mansion that is much more than it appears on the surface. Now, after my initial episode about this, I didn't really dig deeper into the website, but in researching for this podcast episode, I started looking at the website again, and I'm still working my way through it because it is a lot. It is a lot. And there are a few concepts that are taking me a bit of time to understand, but it's really a fascinating story, and I'm hoping that it's going to make a great podcast. There are a couple other locations, but I think I'm going to save those for future podcasts as well. This is where I'm going to leave you, dear listeners. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting me in this podcast, even when I take forever to finish an episode. We'll see you on the flip side. I hope that you enjoyed this. Please let me know if you have any personal experiences with the paranormal, shoot them my way. I love to hear that stuff. If you go on the location or the episode notes, I'll have the different sites where you can email me. Plus, I will link to the locations that we have visited in our podcast today. So thanks again for listening. This has been an episode of What in the Mystical Hell podcast, where when things go bump in the night, we bump back. Have a great one. Stay safe.